So chapter 15 is on adolescent cognitive development. And this really differentiates adolescents from children younger than them because of their cognitive skills just explode during this time period. One of the things that happens is the ability to use abstract logical thinking. And this happens because the brain matures, they get into intense conversations. Somehow all the years, the 7 or 8 years of schooling that they've had so far have been laying down a template for learning. They're faced with moral challenges. And of course now they've got increased independence. So the self is really emerging. Adolescent egocentrism is interesting. It's not egocentrism in the sense that they're selfish. It's just that the way they think. It involves thinking intensely about themselves and about what other people think of them. And this changes as the brain matures. They're involved in thinking about themselves as much more unique, special, and admired or disliked than they actually are. So it's not an accurate portrayal, and it leads to interpretations of everyone else's behavior as a personal judgment. This was first described by David Elkind years ago. They have these things called fables. One is a personal fable. It's an aspect of adolescent egocentrism that's characterized by the adolescent's belief that his or her thoughts, feelings, and experiences are unique or more wonderful or awful than anyone else's. Again, not objective. They also have what's called an invincibility fable, where he or she cannot be overcome or even harmed by anything that might defeat or a normal mortal, such as unprotected sex, drug abuse, or high-speed driving. And of course, we know this is not true. So picture these uniformed Russian draftees. Imagine their lives as tough men, but they would be mortified to know how boyishly naive they are. They look very, very young. Egocentrism can be reassessed. Previous research suggests that egocentrism fosters adolescent risk-taking. The current perspective proposes egocentrism may be protective. Adolescents who feel psychologically invincible tend to be more resilient, which is a good trait to have in adulthood. Piaget called this formal operation period fourth and final stage of cognitive development, characterized by more systematic logic and ability to think about abstract ideas. Example seen in comparison between primary school and high school. So this is where Piaget departs from other developmental psychologists. One of the things they described is the balance test. There'll be a video on this in the information if you want to look at it, trying to figure out how this works. They do have some different types of hypothetical thought, which include reasoning that uses propositions and possibilities that may not reflect reality. They also transform perceptions, and they do that by two different types of reasoning. One is deductive and one is inductive. Deductive reasoning involves reasoning from a general statement, premise, or principle through logical steps to figure out or deduce specific attributes. It's sometimes called top-down reasoning. As you might have guessed, inductive is just the opposite. It involves reasoning one or more specific experiences or facts to a general conclusion. It may be less cognitively advanced than deduction, sometimes called bottom-up thinking or reasoning. Most people do both of these. This just gives you an idea of inductive and deductive reasoning. Observations, past experiences, and ideas from authorities lead to general conclusions in inductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, general principles of application, example, hypothetical cases, extension, and test cases emerge from that. In formal operation thought, there are logical fallacies. One of them is called the sunken cost fallacy. It's a mistaken belief that if money, time, and effort that cannot be recovered has already been invested in some endeavor, then more should be invested in an effort to reach the goal. And And another type of fallacy is called the base rate neglect. Persons ignore the overall frequency of some behavior or characteristic called the base rate in a decision. So egocentrism makes base rate neglect more likely and more personal. So for example, contracting a disease that has a high base rate is different than contracting a disease with a low base rate. So the overall frequency, the person, especially if they're egocentric, they may make more errors in their logic. Two modes of thinking called intuition and analysis. So intuition is a thought that arises from an emotion or a hunch beyond rational explanation and is influenced by past experiences and cultural assumptions. Some people, by the way, tend to be more intuitive than others. Analytical thought is kind of just the opposite. It's thought that results from analysis, such as systematic ranking of pros and cons, risk and consequences, possibilities, and facts. Analytic thought depends on logic and rationality. It's very different than intuition. So once again, intuition or inductive and deductive reasoning, a diagram. You're able to think both inductively and deductively, intuitively and analytically, but adolescents tend more to rely on intuitive thinking than adults do. As we age, we move toward more analytical. So just the whole idea of having experiences makes a person more analytical than intuitive. So it just illustrates what I just said, moving from young to old. As people age, their thinking tends to move from intuitive processing to analytical. There's two systems, both Kahneman's and Piaget's concrete operations. There are two other ways of thinking: preferring emotions. Rational judgment is difficult when egocentric emotions dominate. Experiences in decision-making and thinking facilitates more accurate use of analysis. Better thinking, intuitive decisions are not always best. With maturity, adolescents gradually balance formal analytic thinking and emotion and experiential thinking. So think about an adult who's used intuition all the time. In some ways, cognitively, they may still be in adolescence as opposed to using analytic thinking as an adult. There is this thing called dual processing in the brain. The limbic system activates puberty. By puberty, the prefrontal cortex matures more gradually. So cortical regions involved in impulse control continue to develop into early adulthood. The adolescent brain gives less signals of caution or inhibition than adult brains do. The subcortical regions involved in sensation seeking develop rapidly after puberty. So it exposes the teenage brain to being more impulsive and less analytical than an adult would be. Bursts of sensation seeking at puberty, and then they slowly decline of impulsivity over years of adolescence. There's a general trend in the study that was just the slide of. Trajectories varied individually. Decline in sensation seeking did not correlate with declines in impulsivity. So basically, as you age, you become less impulsive, but there's still more sensation seeking then. The decline is quite precipitously less. Some teenagers are what are called digital natives who take technology for granted. So think about this. All the kids that are born now have never lived in a world without computers. Many have been networking since they were infants. Within nations, the digital divide is shrinking, though digital differences remain. Low-income families continue to be less likely to have high-speed internet at home. Adolescents from low socioeconomic status neighborhoods are less likely to use the internet. The most notable digital divide is age, old people versus young people. Learning via electronic technology has hit us all. The world doing this online. Before technology explosion, egocentric thought decreases with education, conversation, and experience. So maybe you've wondered whether or not online learning is more useful than in face-to-face. It's something we could have a debate about. They're in the same space, but they're not even paying attention to each other. Interesting. Technology encourages rapid shifts of attention, multitasking without reflection, visual learning instead of invisible analysis. And of course, this is based on a study done with video games, victim of violence. Research findings show that the average person played video games 2 hours a day. Some played much more. 23% of boys and 21% of girls never played. Almost 1/3 of all high school students use technology more than 3 hours a day. 1/4 used video games to escape from problems. 1/5 had done poorly in school assignments or tests because of spending too much time on video games. It's interesting, but drawing the line between addiction and non-addiction is interesting. The DSM-5, by the way, has a addiction diagnosis now, and it includes video gaming. There is cyber danger. The adolescent cognitive growth benefits from shared experiences and opinions. Often communication via internet posters affects these fragile self-esteem, and adolescents sometimes share personal information online without thinking about the possibility of consequences. And there can be consequences. Cyberbullying is a big problem. It occurs via the internet, insults, rumors, texting, anonymous phone calls, and video embarrassment. Anonymity provided by electronic technology often brings out the worst in people, and cyberbullying may contribute to dangerous, self-destructive behavior in victims. This person stands behind a phony Facebook page that portrays her as a racist, sexually active, drug-using teenager. Adolescent imagery can often go viral. Texts and email rumors and insults can reach thousands of people instantaneously. Cyberbullying is particularly prevalent between 11 and 14 years of age. It's worse when imaginary audience is strong and identity is forming and impulsive thoughts precede analytic ones. So a child may reply impulsively without thinking about how they're affecting other people. And adolescent victims are likely to suffer from depression, and in some cases, there have been news stories of teens committing suicide. Sexting contains troubling images for teenagers. It involves sending sexual photographs, including reported instances as high as 30% of teenagers, and it varies by school, gender, and ethnicity. It is rarely known by adults. The dangers include the fact that pictures are often forwarded without the naked person's knowledge, and senders risk serious depression if the reaction is not what they wish to have happen. There are different levels of teaching. They include secondary and middle school, periods after primary school of education, elementary grade school, before tertiary, which is college. Usually occurs from about age 12 to 18, although the age range varies somewhat by school and what the nation that you live in. So for example, in Sweden, the ages are different. Middle school children are between elementary and high school. Usually, we used to call it junior high school. Usually begins in 5th or 6th grade and ends by 8th grade. This just shows the percentage of kids graduating from high school. So the United States is in blue, and at around 70%, or 80, under 70, 80%, whereas Germany is almost 100%. Middle school increases behavioral problems. Many students dislike middle school because of the teasing. Teacher-student relationships are undercut. Exposure to more teachers and more peers, and often moving around, and it makes it impersonal and distant. Less learning takes place, and more risk for the teenager. It seems like a time period too when there's less parental help. There is some acclaim difficult, some public acclaim difficult, and many students seek peer acceptance, so they start rejecting family and gravitating toward their peer group. Ways that kids in middle school cope is by blaming others. There's an entity approach to intelligence versus an incremental approach. Entity meaning that it's based on some innate ability to learn, whereas incremental means that the more you expose a child to learning, the more intelligence they gain. And of course, this is debated in the field of psychometrics. So entity approach sees ability as innate fixed quantity present at birth, rejects the idea that enhancing effort to enhance achievement works, whereas I mentioned incremental approach poses intelligence to be directly affected by effort. So the more you read, the more you put in, the more intelligence you have. It suggests that children can master whatever they seek to learn if they pay attention, participate in class, study, and complete their homework. This might be something interesting to talk about during a Zoom meeting. Entering a new school can be challenging. Transition from one school to another often affects the ability of function and learning, not just academically but socially. Changing schools just when the growth spurt is occurring and sexual characteristics are developing is bound to create stress. The first year of any new school, middle, high school, or even college correlates with increasing bullying, decreasing achievement, depression, and eating disorders. So those transitions can be very difficult. College bound is a big question that most high school kids have to think about. Teachers assume students have mastered formal thinking instead of teaching how to do it, and increased classes assessed by external scored exams do not assure college readiness. As a college instructor, I know that to be a fact, often getting high school students who aren't ready for college. There is high stakes testing. It involves evaluating. The evaluation is critical to determine success or failure, like an SAT or an ACT, and it determines if a student will graduate or be promoted. The big question is, do these tests work? Are they good predictors of college success? And of course, this just looks at graduation rates across different cultures. Look at that if you like. Just pause here. 70% of high school graduates enter college. This number that does not include students who never graduate from high school. So, as the one chart a few slides ago showed, only in the United States, only about 70% of kids, 7 out of 10, actually go to college. What do you want to be when you grow up is a question that most kids think about when they're in grade school. Students have developed a vision of their future and select courses that will help them achieve a goal. Students need to know college is not the only option, but additional training is often most necessary. So even like at IVCC, you can go for academics or you can go for some vocational training. One isn't better than the other, they're just different. The program for international student assessment shows that international tests taken by 15-year-olds in 50 nations is designed to measure problem solving and cognition in everyday life. Overall, the U.S. students did worse than on the PISA than on the Pearls or the TIMSS, which is the math test. Basically, it's saying that kids are not prepared for the rigors of problem solving and cognition that is part of college life. The PISA correlates that which contributes to high achievement. Overall, all stakeholders, that would be students and teachers and parents, value education and individualized learning approaches are used. The standards are high and clear. Teachers and administrators are valued, and learning is a priority across the entire system. So if you have high scores on the PISA, you embrace those 4 things. The value of education, clear standards, value of teachers and administrators, and that you prioritize learning across the entire system. And that's the end of cognition. Be sure to check out the information in the course information folder.